A gust of icy wind howled over the narrow mountain trail, whipping sharp snowflakes directly into Alejandro's face. Dark strands of hair escaped from under his old wool cap, and squinting, he peered into the distance, hoping to discern anything beyond the white shroud. This, however, was a familiar sight in the Sierra Blanca, a harsh mountain region where one wrong step could cost a person their life. Today, Alejandro had decided to take a lesser-known path, hoping to shorten the route to his dilapidated hunting cabin. His old mare, Dulcie, stubbornly refused to go further and had repeatedly tried to dislodge her rider, so he left the horse at the edge of the woods where the snow wasn't as deep and continued on foot. The closer he got to the precipice, the more distinctly he heard a strange howl cutting through the wailing wind. At first, he thought it was just an echo in the mountain ravines, but the sound repeated, now more mournful and heart-wrenching. Curiosity triumphed over caution. Alejandro descended a few meters down the slippery slope and noticed a dark figure near an old fallen cedar. As he approached, he saw a wounded she-wolf, her fur appearing silvery gray in the moonlight. Looking closer, he realized the animal was emaciated and, judging by her rounded belly, was carrying pups. She lay on her side, breathing heavily, and a fresh, bloody trail adorned her paw as if from a trap or snare. The she-wolf weakly opened her eyes, staring at Alejandro. Her gaze was resigned, yet devoid of malice, as if her strength to defend herself had waned. The hunter knew a wild animal could behave unpredictably, but his heart wouldn't let him leave. Kneeling, he carefully rummaged in his backpack, pulled out a strip of rope, and improvised a bandage to stop the bleeding. The she-wolf twitched almost imperceptibly, but didn't attack. It seemed as if she understood. The man was trying to help her. Suddenly, Alejandro imagined he saw another wolf's silhouette somewhere to the side in the thick undergrowth. He heard the crunch of snow and, turning sharply, saw a pair of glowing eyes. The creature was larger than a typical wolf, its coloring almost blending with the night shadow. It only gave itself away because the snow on its fur glittered in the moonlight, but the strange figure quickly vanished into the depths of the forest, and silence fell, broken only by the moan of the wind. Looking around, Alejandro realized the she-wolf needed to be moved to a safer place, or she wouldn't survive the night. His hunting cabin was several miles away, but there was no other choice. He took off his worn jacket, carefully spread it under the exhausted animal, and, struggling to suppress a shiver from the cold and adrenaline, tried to lift the she-wolf. She bared her teeth, but didn't bite, and when the man carefully eased her onto his shoulder, she only whimpered slightly. "All right, girl," he whispered, feeling his heart pound in his chest. "I don't know why I need to do this, but it feels right. Just hang in there." Step by step, he began to climb, trying to get out of the hollow and back onto the trail. The snow, at times, reached almost to his thighs, and each exhale turned into a cloud of vapor. The she-wolf's condition was alarming. Her breathing was erratic. She barely seemed aware of what was happening. Alejandro even thought she might die in his arms. However, halfway to the cabin, he noticed the she-wolf stirring weakly, trying to lift her head. He had a feeling she was looking for someone in the night. Again, the sensation arose that someone was watching them, perhaps that same black creature. But no sound, except for the wailing wind, reached him. After long, exhausting minutes, the man reached his hunting shack. Inside, It was cold and damp, smelling of staleness and smoke, but it was still better than spending the night in the freezing cold. He carefully laid the she-wolf on the floor near the chipped stove, then lifted the lid of the firebox and kindled a fire. The flames reluctantly took hold, illuminating the fragile walls with a yellow-orange light. The she-wolf lay breathing heavily, but at least she didn't try to flee. It seemed she simply had no strength left to resist. Alejandro sat beside her to check the paw wound again, and his own heart ached with sympathy when he saw how emaciated she appeared. His gaze instinctively darted to her rounded belly. If the she-wolf truly was heavily pregnant, she needed peace. Otherwise, disaster was inevitable. Somewhere in the distance beyond the wall, a piercing howl was heard, but now muffled by the distance. It could mean anything. Either a pack of wolves was searching for their lost mate, or some random animal was announcing its presence. Alejandro's heart tightened with anxiety. He understood that by interfering with the wild world, he was taking responsibility for this she-wolf, and perhaps for her unborn pups. Leaving his worries for tomorrow, Alejandro threw one last log into the stove and settled on the floor, pressing his hunting backpack against him as a pillow. The she-wolf looked into his eyes for a moment, as if accepting his presence, and somewhere outside, in the frosty night wind, a black shadow flickered again, the same large wolf, still watching their every move. What exactly he was looking for and what he was waiting for remained a mystery. The next morning, Alejandro woke to an abominable cold. The stove had long gone out, and narrow cracks in the cabin walls let in gusts of wind and snow. Opening his eyes, he noted that the she-wolf was still lying in the same spot, occasionally lifting her head and anxiously sniffing the air. While the man rekindled the stove, trying to warm the room, his thoughts wandered chaotically. He recalled the previous night's story of miraculously dragging the animal here, and of the mysterious black wolf who seemed to be watching them from afar. Alejandro had lived in the mountains for a long time and had encountered many stories, but none were as perplexing as this. Once the stove was blazing, he decided to examine the she-wolf's wound more closely. Removing the bloody bandage, the man saw that the injury wasn't too deep, but the paw was still swollen. Assuming a more secure bandage was needed, he retrieved the remaining bandages and a clean rag from his backpack, items he had once received from a village friend named Elena. The she-wolf growled lowly when Alejandro gently touched her fur, but she didn't try to bite. It seemed the creature was finally beginning to understand. This man posed no immediate threat. She certainly couldn't hunt herself, which meant she depended on him. A couple of hours later, when the cabin had warmed up slightly and the she-wolf had eaten the salted meat offered to her, Alejandro decided to go out for a short while. He needed to chop wood and check for other wolves nearby, especially that black one. He opened the creaking door, and the cold air immediately buffeted his face. Snow fell in flakes, and trees bent under the wind's gusts. "I hope no one's out in the yard," he mumbled, gripping his old axe. The silence around was deceptive. The snow absorbed all sounds, creating the illusion that no one was behind the cabin. Alejandro looked around, noticing a couple of fresh tracks leading to an old pine. He approached, but only saw a raven that fluttered up and flew away. He quickly chopped the wood, gathered an armload, and returned inside. The she-wolf still lay motionless, but her ears perked up when he entered, blowing steam from her mouth. After a while, A familiar voice came from outside the door. "Hey, Alejandro, are you in there? Open up!" It was Elena, the same friend who lived closest to the hunting cabin. She had apparently made her way through the snowdrifts to find out where he had disappeared. Alejandro rushed to the door, opened it slightly, trying to block the interior with his back. "Hi," he said softly, as if fearing the she-wolf might attack their guest. "Come in quickly, it's cold." Elena stepped inside, brushing snow from her cloak, and immediately noticed the she-wolf. "Good heavens, what is that? Did you drag a wild animal in here? Have you completely lost your mind?" "Quiet, quiet," he tried to calm her. "She's injured and pregnant. I found her on the brink of death. If I'd left her there, she wouldn't have survived, and I'd go crazy with guilt." "Alejandro!" Elena sighed, shaking her head, and gripped the knife at her belt just in case. She could be dangerous. Wolves aren't house cats. He shrugged, a humorless smile on his face. "You see, she can barely move. And by the way, she didn't attack me. Maybe you shouldn't wave that knife around." Elena had to put her weapon away. She glanced at the she-wolf. She watched the guest with bright yellow eyes, but didn't growl, as if understanding that these humans posed no threat to her now. "And what are you going to do? Are you going to keep her here forever?" Elena asked in a calmer tone. "I don't know. First, she needs to recover. And after that, if she gives birth, I have no idea what to do with the pups." Elena covered her face with her hands, as if in despair. However, Alejandro knew this young woman well. Though she might scold, she had a kind heart. Crouching down, she observed the she-wolf, then carefully pushed a bowl of water towards her. "At least let her drink, and be careful, all right? Our neighbors down the valley have been noticing missing livestock. They say wolves are getting closer to the village. If they find out you've hidden one here, and she's pregnant no less, a real hunt will begin. They'll curse you." Alejandro clenched his jaw and nodded. He understood. The people in the Sierra Blanca area would recall all past tragedies involving wolves, and they would likely not understand him. "Thanks for coming. Maybe if I'm careful, no one will notice. But heaven forbid hunters are probably already roaming nearby. I hope everything will be all right." However, deep down, he felt that events were just beginning to spiral. When Elena said goodbye and headed back, and the she-wolf again retreated into her silent state, Alejandro nervously peeked out the window. The snowy curtain hid everything but a few nearby pines, and that black figure among the branches no longer appeared. Alejandro sighed, trying to shake off the growing sense of anxiety. He sat next to the she-wolf, quietly telling her, "Don't worry, we'll figure something out." But deep down, he knew the situation was becoming increasingly dangerous. And if any of the locals found out about her, trouble would be inevitable. At dawn, the blizzard had somewhat subsided, and Alejandro decided to risk descending into the village for provisions and bandages. His food supply was running low, and the she-wolf needed more calories if she was indeed in the late stages of pregnancy. The man was afraid to leave her alone in the dilapidated cabin, but he had no other choice. The she-wolf, whom he had named Luna, was clearly improving a little. She no longer lay still, but occasionally raised her head and even wagged her tail. Hearing Alejandro rummaging by the door and preparing to leave, Luna anxiously shifted her front paws as if wanting to follow him. But her wound and general condition did not yet allow her to move far. "Hang in there! Alejandro said, opening the door slightly and letting a blast of cold air in. "I'll be back soon. Just don't go breaking everything, please." She only tilted her head in response. Perhaps she didn't understand his words, but she sensed his tone. The descent to the village took longer than usual due to the deep snowdrifts. Below, familiar sights awaited him: a few small houses, a general store, and a tavern where locals usually gathered to share gossip. Alejandro first went to see Sergio, the owner of the small shop, who rarely missed an opportunity to chat with customers. "Hey, where have you been?" Sergio squinted, seeing the familiar face. "Still wandering in the mountains?" "Just taking care of business," Alejandro replied evasively, trying not to make eye contact. "I need some flour, a couple of cans of food, and bandages, if you have any left." "Bandages?" Sergio frowned. "Did you hurt your hand?" "Something like that. Just need to dress a small wound, keep it from getting infected." While the shopkeeper weighed and measured the goods, Rocio, a statuesque woman known for her fiery temper, burst into the store. She was practically fuming with indignation. "Sergio, have you heard? Federico from the neighboring ranch lost a couple of sheep last night. They only found blood and wolf tracks." Alejandro tensed, trying not to betray his emotions. "Yes, I heard." Sergio nodded grimly. "They say the pack is roaming right near the houses, so people are gathering to look for these animals in the coming days." "Exactly. They're already forming a hunting party," Rocio continued. "They say some saw a black wolf as big as a horse. Looks like he's the pack leader." Alejandro's heart skipped a beat. So this mysterious black wolf wasn't just a random animal. Perhaps he was the one who had followed them that night. But why? Rocio, meanwhile, angrily clenched her fists and blurted out, "And I also heard that some man is protecting a she-wolf that hunters shot. They found blood trails and the man's footprints right there, essentially a traitor, because wolves are now threatening our livelihood." "Seriously?" Sergio raised an eyebrow, turning to Alejandro. "You don't know anything about this?" The hunter shrugged, trying to appear indifferent. "No, maybe it's just rumors. We have plenty of tall tales every day. I told you I hurt my hand. That's why I'm getting bandages." He looked confident, but inside he was writhing with anxiety. After gathering his supplies, the man quickly paid and left the store, trying to avoid meeting anyone on the way. Near his cabin, he noticed Elena waiting for him. "I knew you went for food," she said, catching her breath after a brisk walk. "Listen, hunters are really planning a roundup. They'll be scouring the forest and mountain trails. If they find Luna with you—" "Then it's over," Alejandro finished, clenching his fists. "I understand." "Maybe there's still a chance to get her somewhere further away," suggested the young woman. "But in her condition, that's extremely dangerous. And what guarantee is there that the pack will accept her back? Or that she'll even make it?" He gave a wry smile. "No guarantees. For now, I'll keep her here, at least for a couple more days, so she can regain her strength. Then we'll see." Elena sighed regretfully. "Be careful, and if anything happens, call me. I'll help." They exchanged a brief glance, and Alejandro saw warm support in her eyes. Then he headed back to the trail leading to the cabin where Luna waited. Though waited was a strong word. More likely, she lay in a semi-conscious state. But this place was the only one that could offer her even a shred of safety now. On the way back, Alejandro noticed unfamiliar tracks in the snow, perhaps belonging to hunters or those tracking the pack. His mood darkened with each step. If people actually stumbled upon Luna, they wouldn't spare her. He would have to be shrewder than ever before to save the pregnant she-wolf and her future pups. By the middle of the next day, an almost ominous calm had settled in the vicinity of the cabin. The snowfall had stopped, and the sun occasionally peeked out from behind the clouds, casting dazzling reflections on the white snowdrifts. Alejandro had managed to throw wood into the stove and feed Luna fresh meat from his supplies. The she-wolf was regaining her strength, lifting her head more often and seemingly reacting less painfully to touches on her bandaged paw. Nevertheless, the danger remained real. The more Alejandro pondered yesterday's conversations in the village, the clearer he understood. Hunters could arrive at any moment, and though his cabin was remote, sooner or later someone would surely stop by to check. He had to figure out how to hide the she-wolf, or at least divert suspicion. Lost in thought, he opened the door slightly to check the weather, and suddenly noticed a dark figure creeping between the trees. It didn't look human. The silhouette moved silently and smoothly. Soon a wolf's snout, black as night with yellow eyes, appeared from behind a tree trunk. The very creature rumored to be the pack leader. It looked directly at Alejandro, fearless, neither fleeing nor growling. It was as if it expected the man to make the first move. The man felt a surge of adrenaline. Everything inside him screamed that the wolf could be extremely dangerous. However, the animal clearly wasn't about to attack. On the contrary, it slowly approached within a few meters, digging its paws into the snow, and lowered its snout, as if in recognition. Alejandro sensed this was not a gesture of aggression, but rather of curiosity. "You must be the black wolf everyone fears," he mumbled, understanding that the beast wouldn't comprehend human words, but would sense the intonation. The wolf slowly shifted to the left, casting a quick glance at the cabin, as if knowing exactly who was inside. Luna, hearing the commotion, also stirred and rose, quietly growling at the edge of audibility. Soon she began to tap her paw on the floor, as if acknowledging the black wolf's presence nearby. The silence was broken by a loud shout from the opposite side of the forest. "Alejandro! Hey, are you there? Show yourself!" The man recognized the voice of Manuel, one of the hunters from the neighboring village. He had a reputation as a tough man who wouldn't stop if he decided to hunt down wolves. Alejandro's heart sank. If Manuel found him now, saw the black wolf, and God forbid found out about Luna, the consequences would be fatal. He quickly gestured to the beast. "Go!" To his surprise, the wolf understood the signal. With a short, barely audible sound, it vanished among the trees like a ghost. Alejandro immediately threw the door wide open, pretending he had just stepped out for some fresh air. "Yes, I'm here," he called back, trying to sound confident. "What's wrong?" Manuel emerged from behind a low boulder, a rifle cradled against his shoulder. Another younger hunter with an intense gaze walked beside him. "We were looking for you," Manuel said gruffly. "Word got around that you'd been frequenting your shack, and wolves have been showing up in the area. Haven't you found any tracks?" "Nothing special," Alejandro tried to answer calmly. "Sometimes I hear howling at night, but that's common here." Manuel looked around the cabin, then tapped his boot on the threshold. "Can I come in? I'll have a look around. They say you might be hiding a wolf, and I don't like that one bit." The hunter himself seemed ready for a confrontation. Alejandro struggled to remain calm. If Manuel burst inside, he would discover Luna and probably realize she was pregnant. but denying him entry might only heighten suspicion. "I see you're eager," Alejandro said with feigned indifference. "Come in. But honestly, it's a mess in here. The roof leaks, barely any firewood, and it's freezing." Manuel nodded to his partner, and together they entered the cabin. Luna had managed to hide behind an old, bulky cabinet that Alejandro had moved against the wall to block the cracks from the wind. Only her tail, barely visible, peeked out from behind the stove. The man felt his heart pounding. Manuel walked through the tiny room, inspected the stove, and poked with a broom in the corner where some rags lay scattered. He noticed bloodstains on the floor, remnants from when Alejandro had tended to Luna's wound. "What's this blood?" "Nothing serious," Alejandro readily lied, trying to sound nonchalant. "I was butchering a deer here recently. Had to do it quickly, lots of snow. I guess I didn't clean it all up." Manuel shook his head doubtfully. He sniffed the air, then cast a quick glance at the cabinet. But the sound of wind whistling through the cracks and a faint smell of dampness threw him off. "All right," he grumbled, heading for the exit. "But look, Alejandro, if I find out you're harboring a wolf, especially a pregnant female, you'll regret it. I'll take down both the beast and you right there. Understood?" "I understand," Alejandro replied, pretending the threat didn't bother him. "Good luck in your hunt." As he watched Manuel and his partner disappear in the direction of the forest, he was trembling inside. The encounter had been that tense. Only when he heard their footsteps fade did he allow himself to exhale. He closed the door, quickly moved the cabinet, and saw Luna curled up in the corner, ears flattened. She seemed to sense the threat and could have attacked the uninvited guests at any moment. "Easy, it's over," he whispered, trying to calm himself. But he knew perfectly well this was only a temporary reprieve. Manuel and the other hunters would return, and they would be far more aggressive if they caught a wolf's scent. Alejandro looked at Luna. In her eyes there was something akin to submission and fear, and somewhere out there, beyond the trees, the black wolf still roamed, having appeared at this moment for reasons unknown. With each passing minute it became clearer. Precious time was running out, and he had to find a way to save the she-wolf from certain slaughter. The next morning, Alejandro could barely sit still. He kept looking out the window, listening for rustles. Luna, recovering from her injury and about to give birth, occupied all his thoughts. On one hand, he understood that keeping the she-wolf in the small cabin was becoming increasingly difficult. The risk of being discovered grew every day. On the other hand, how could he release her into the wild in such a condition? Closer to noon, Elena suddenly appeared at the door again. Breathless, she barely stepped inside before bumping into the doorframe and said, "Ale, there are people gathering on the trail. I think they're coming to your cabin. I counted 4 of them. Most likely, they're hunters." The man paled, turning to Luna. She looked at him nervously, flattening her ears. It seemed she, too, sensed the approaching danger. "There's nothing for it. I'll have to meet them," Alejandro decided. "If they come in and find Luna, that's it. I have to try and lead them astray." There was no time for lengthy deliberation. He grabbed his rifle and went out, giving Elena a quick instruction. "Stay with her if you can. If anything, camouflage the door, maybe even the window. I'll try to hold them off." The young woman nodded, and Alejandro moved through the yard, where the snow was already nearly waist deep. On the slope, about 30 yards away, he saw 3 armed men and another figure behind them. He recognized familiar faces, those he had seen the day before, and a new one, with a stern expression and gray hair. "Halt!" the gray-haired man shouted. "We heard you saw wolves." Alejandro squared his shoulders, trying to speak firmly. "I live here. I've seen wolves many times, but nothing out of the ordinary. Snow, mountains, same as usual." The hunters clearly expected a different answer. The gray-haired man waved his hand. "Don't lie. We found fresh tracks near your cabin. Someone was definitely walking there last night." "Damn," Alejandro thought, "that's a bad sign." But out loud, he merely said mockingly, "Those tracks might be from last weekend. I shot a deer." Then Manuel, the one who had already visited, stepped forward. He gave an unpleasant smile. "And we heard whispers that you might be keeping a wolf in the house. They say someone saw a silhouette. I suggest we search your dwelling." Inside, Alejandro felt fear boiling, but he maintained his outward composure. "You want to search my home without any reason? That's against all fairness." The gray-haired man strode the short distance and fixed his gaze on Alejandro's face. "What fairness is there when wolves are attacking livestock? If you're helping them, you become an accomplice. And then, farewell, my friend." The man felt time stretch out like chewing gum. If the hunters went in right now, they would find Luna. Elena, of course, would try something, but she likely wouldn't be able to hold off 4 armed men. He had to distract them. "All right, as you wish," Alejandro ground out, casting a fleeting glance at the distant slope. "But it seems to me you should look over there by the forest. I saw several dark silhouettes there. The wolves might have gone that way." He pointed towards a hollow below, which was easy to descend into. The hunters exchanged glances, hesitant. They clearly wanted to check the cabin immediately. But on the other hand, fresh animal tracks were a more hot lead. "You're coming with us," the gray-haired man said, grabbing Alejandro's sleeve. "You'll show us those silhouettes. Just remember, if you lied, we'll still come back to your shack." "Okay," the man agreed, comforting himself with the thought that he would at least buy Elena and Luna a few hours. He hoped that by then they would have managed to hide the she-wolf better or move her to a safe place. Setting off, the group of hunters, led by the gray-haired man, headed towards the edge of the grove. Alejandro held his rifle in his hands but tried not to appear hostile. Meanwhile, thoughts rushed through his mind. Just hope Luna doesn't make any noise. Just hope she doesn't get out and run into one of these guys. And Elena can't handle it alone if something goes wrong. Behind them, the cabin remained, hidden under a thick layer of snow. From time to time, the man looked back, trying to understand if everything was calm, but the snow curtains and trees obscured what was happening in the yard. Inside, he was bubbling with something between panic and determination. He knew it was only a matter of time. The hunters wouldn't rest until they had proof of the wolves' presence. And he had no desire to betray Luna. Leading the hunters through increasingly difficult snowdrifts, Alejandro caught himself thinking, "I've gone too far, risking everything for one she-wolf." But some inner force wouldn't let him abandon her to certain death. He didn't want to repeat past mistakes when inaction had already cost him one dear person. While Alejandro led the hunters on a fruitless search for imaginary wolf tracks at the base of the slope, Elena remained at the cabin with Luna. The young woman knew that time was short, and at any moment someone from the village might show up for a search. Approaching the she-wolf, she saw that Luna was visibly nervous. She sensed that the cabin's owner had left and that people were lurking nearby, ready to kill her at the first opportunity. "Easy, girl," Elena murmured, trying to speak softly. "He'll be back soon. We just need to hide you better." The she-wolf rose on her injured paw and painfully moved further into the cabin. It was clear she was breathing heavily and occasionally flattening her ears, listening to every sound. Elena noticed that Luna's belly was even larger than a few days ago. Childbirth was very near, it seemed. At that very moment, a muffled growl was heard from outside. Someone or something was prowling near the walls. Another wolf. Elena froze, gripping the hilt of her knife, but then she distinguished a soft whimper, definitely not human. Opening the window a crack, she saw the black wolf standing nearby, looking directly into her eyes. His fur shimmered silver in the sun, and a strange curiosity could be read in his yellow pupils. At first, the young woman was paralyzed, but then she remembered Alejandro's words about some black figure hovering around the cabin as if guarding Luna. Perhaps he's from the pack, searching for the missing female, or is this how he shows concern? She wondered. Nothing else came to mind. "Get away," Elena whispered, afraid to attract attention. "If they see you, they'll shoot right away." The black wolf shook his head slightly, as if he truly understood her threats. Then he uttered a hoarse sound. Luna inside the cabin responded with a quiet growl, and Elena's heart almost leapt out of her chest. The main thing was that these greetings weren't heard by the wrong ears. It seemed the animals were communicating on their own level, exchanging signals. A minute later, the black wolf slipped into the depths of the forest. The young woman exhaled with relief and turned to Luna. The she-wolf seemed to have found new energy, beginning to pace nervously around the small room. Several times she sniffed the air and crouched, as if unable to settle. Elena slowly approached. They say she-wolves can choose where to give birth. You should find a secluded spot, shouldn't you? It's much too small here. She remembered the old pantry in the cabin, a miniature room, separated from the main one by a partition nailed together long ago. It was dark and empty, except for a few old straw sacks. Thinking this might serve as a hiding place, Elena unlatched the wooden bolt and partially opened the door. "Come on, girl. Look, you'll be more comfortable here." Luna, limping, scurried after her. In the pantry there were indeed fewer drafts, and no one would be able to see the she-wolf by simply looking through the window. The she-wolf cautiously sniffed the floor, then snorted, and, it seemed, agreed. She lay down on her side. Distant voices were heard again from outside. Elena froze, straining to listen. But they didn't sound as close. Probably the hunters were still scouring the other side of the forest. But sooner or later they would tire of searching and return to inspect the house more thoroughly. That meant time was short. Elena realized that if Luna started giving birth, she couldn't be moved, which meant she would have to be allowed to do so here in peace. What would Alejandro say when he returned? He must already suspect the difficulty of the situation, but he probably hadn't foreseen that everything would happen so suddenly. The young woman herself had no experience with animal births, but the warm straw and darkness of the pantry were the best option available. "Hold on, Luna," Elena whispered, closing the door so the she-wolf couldn't be seen. "Maybe you'll give birth later when Alejandro returns." Deep down, anxiety gnawed at her. What if the labor starts right now? How will I handle it? And what if the hunters force their way into the house? Will I have to defend a mother wolf and her newborn pups? Her head spun from the abundance of fears. Meanwhile, Luna inside the pantry let out a tense sigh and a short howl. Elena understood. Everything could begin at any moment. While Elena guarded Luna in the cabin, Alejandro trudged through deep snowdrifts with the hunters, unsuccessfully trying to deflect their suspicions. However, it gradually became clear that there were no large wolf packs in the forest, only sparse tracks leading far up the slope. Manuel and the gray-haired hunter named Don Esteban began to grow restless from the fruitless search. "Looks like you're leading us on a wild goose chase," Manuel grumbled, stopping by a fallen tree. "Not a single wolf the whole way. And where are your shadows?" Alejandro shrugged. "Maybe they went further afield. I'm no wizard to make them stand still." Gray-haired Don Esteban frowned. "Either way, we need to head back. We still plan to check those areas by the mine. Rumor has it there are wolves there. But don't forget, we'll check your cabin again when we return. You won't get out of it next time." The man shuddered inwardly, sensing that this would only increase the danger for Luna. But outwardly, he tried to maintain an unruffled demeanor. "All right, if you want to waste your time, come ahead. But I repeat, I have no wolves. I can barely even get firewood." With these words, he watched the hunters until they disappeared among the pines. Then, without losing a second, he turned and walked back to the cabin, rushing to check if everything was all right there. The snow crunched under his feet, the cold wind stung his cheeks, and thoughts of what to do next endlessly spun in his head. When he reached the cabin, he saw no hunter tracks around, thankfully, but he did notice large paw prints trailing around the corner. Everything indicated that the black wolf had visited the cabin again. Alejandro went inside and found a strange scene. Elena was sitting in front of the closed pantry, and muffled sounds like a groan or a quiet howl emanated from within. "What's happening?" he asked, looking around nervously. "Luna," the young woman whispered. "It seems she's in labor. It all started about 2 hours ago, and I nearly went crazy with fear that someone would break into the house." Alejandro bit his lip. He imagined that the birth of a wild animal would be painful, but he wasn't prepared for it to happen right now, and in such conditions. Taking the remaining clean cloth from his backpack, he moved closer to the pantry. "We need to help her, at least make the place drier, and give her some food just in case." But opening the door, he saw that Luna was managing on her own. Mother Nature had endowed the she-wolf with instincts often beyond human comprehension. She grunted, bared her fangs, and licked the pups that emerged one after another, tiny bundles of warm fur, still blind and helpless. Counting, Alejandro found 4 pups. By the light of a small lamp, he saw Luna gently biting their umbilical cords and tucking the little ones under her belly to warm them. The sight was both touching and daunting. This creature, considered by all to be a merciless predator, was displaying genuine maternal care, understandable to any living being. "Wow!" he gasped. "She did it. And so far it's all quiet," Elena added. "No one burst in, though I heard footsteps outside. Maybe your diversion with the hunters bought us a couple of hours." Luna, exhausted, lifted her head and looked at the humans. There was no fury in her gaze. Rather, it was a mixture of weariness and gratitude. Alejandro carefully placed a dish of water and the remaining meat near the pantry entrance, trying not to get too close. He knew that some animals could be extremely aggressive during this period. However, the she-wolf didn't seem to object. When she was sure that the pups were breathing normally and purring, trying to find their mother's warmth, Luna made a quiet, almost friendly sound, as if saying, "Thank you for the help, humans. But remember, I am still a predator." This unexpected respite gave Alejandro and Elena time to discuss their next steps. Hiding a she-wolf with newborns in the cabin wouldn't work for long. The hunters would be back any minute. They needed to find a place where the wolves could live unnoticed, at least until the pups grew stronger. "There's an old mine in the mountains," Elena suddenly remembered. "It's been abandoned for a long time, but there are secluded passages. Though rumors say it's not entirely safe there, someone saw a black wolf. Maybe that's his territory." "Black wolf," Alejandro repeated, recalling how that mysterious creature had fled into the forest as soon as it saw the hunters. "It seems he's connected to Luna somehow, but I don't understand how yet." He looked at the pups doubtfully. "They need warmth and safety. If the hunters find them, it's over." Elena nodded, agreeing. Weighing the risks, they decided to wait until Luna had recovered a little after giving birth, and then try to transport her and the pups to a place where human eyes couldn't reach. But they understood. They would have to confront both possible dangers in the mine and the hunters who could appear at any moment. A night awaited them, and no one could say what a new dawn would bring. Night fell again, but this time it was quiet and clear. The snow cover glistened under the silvery moonbeams, hence the name for the she-wolf, Luna, seemed all the more fitting. Inside the cabin, a tense silence reigned, broken only by the rare squeaks of the pups and the rhythmic drip-drip of water seeping through the old roof. Luna was slowly recovering. Several times, Alejandro noticed her settling more comfortably and licking her young, stretching her entire body to warm them. Each time, he felt a mixed sensation, respect, awe, and pain, from the understanding that tomorrow or the day after, hunters might be here. Around midnight, Elena went out to scout to see if those people were still lurking nearby. Alejandro was left alone with the wolf family, and then, closer to the middle of the night, a heavy rustling sound came from outside the window. The man sprang up, grabbed his rifle, and darted to the door, expecting to see uninvited guests. But looking out, he met eyes with the black wolf. It stood at the edge of the clearing, appearing even larger and almost unreal in the moonlight. "Why do you come?" Alejandro whispered, though he knew the beast wouldn't understand human phrases. But the wolf raised its muzzle, sniffed the air, and let out a prolonged howl, as if desperately trying to say something. Luna responded with a quiet whimper, but continued to lie with her pups, not coming out. The black wolf slowly approached the threshold, maintaining a wary distance. It seemed like an attempt to show Alejandro that it wasn't attacking, but also wouldn't allow anyone close if it sensed danger. Surprisingly, the man felt as if the beast was checking. "Is Luna all right?" Then a step crunched in the snow. Elena had returned. Seeing the enormous wolf at the door, she gasped, almost dropping her lantern. "Easy," Alejandro murmured almost inaudibly. "He doesn't seem to be an enemy. I just don't understand what he wants." "Maybe he's trying to take Luna?" the young woman suggested. "Or he's checking on her, but he's afraid of people." Nevertheless, the black beast did not approach further. After a couple of minutes, it let out a short howl to signal its departure and vanished into the night shadows. Elena shook her head in bewilderment. A strange sight. You know, there are legends. If a black wolf comes to a house, it's a change of fate. But I wouldn't want to believe all those old wives' tales. It seems fate itself is here with us, Alejandro said with a wry smile. Well, how is it outside? I didn't see any hunters. It seems they went further into the mountains, towards the mine as they planned. But they could come back in the morning. So time was running out. They went back inside, saw that Luna was still nursing her pups. The female whimpered quietly if a human came too close, so Alejandro tried to keep his distance and only occasionally threw a bowl of water into the pantry. He didn't want to disturb the new mother unnecessarily. Outside, it was getting colder, and it became clear. If they wanted to move during the day, the journey through the snowy trails would be difficult. Moreover, Luna's paw hadn't fully healed yet, and the 4 little ones required special care. But they couldn't stay longer. The hunters would be back any minute. We'll go at dawn tomorrow, Alejandro suggested. I know a shortcut to the old mine. Hardly anyone uses it. We'll try to make it by noon. Then we'll have to hide. What if there are people in the mine? Elena doubted. Then we'll have to deal with it on the spot. Seriously, I don't see another option. If Luna stays, they'll definitely find her. The young woman nodded, accepting this risky plan. They decided to take the pups in a log basket, lining it with blankets so they wouldn't freeze, and Luna would walk herself as much as she could. Although the she-wolf still looked weak, powerful survival instincts were ingrained in the wild animal. Perhaps she would find the strength. All that remained was to wait for morning and hope that the black wolf wouldn't betray them to the hunters. Alejandro caught himself thinking how ridiculous that sounded. A beast could betray? But what he saw in those yellow eyes made him doubt everything familiar. It seemed the black wolf possessed some unfathomable intelligence or an ancient spirit that permeated the Sierra Blanca mountains. The short night's rest came to an end. Alejandro and Elena tried to nap, taking turns guarding the door, and Luna, despite her injured paw and weakness, guarded her litter, sometimes anxiously scanning the emptiness, as if sensing a long and dangerous journey to the mysterious mine awaited them. At dawn, dense snow clouds covered the mountains, promising a new blizzard. Alejandro and Elena got up before the first rays of sun. They quickly ate a cold breakfast of tortillas and leftover meat, unwilling to start a fire. Smoke could attract curious eyes. Luna watched their preparations warily, hiding in the shadows of the pantry. First, Alejandro prepared a large wicker basket he used for firewood. He lined it with old blankets and placed the tiny pups inside, who had barely opened their eyes. They whimpered softly, apparently not understanding why their mother's warmth was gone. Luna, sensing her offspring being taken, emerged from the pantry, limping on her bandaged paw. She flattened her ears but didn't charge, allowing the man to take the pups, though her eyes expressed anxiety. "Easy," Alejandro said. "We want to get you out of here before the hunters arrive." Elena took the bowl of water and a bag of food for themselves. Soon, the entire small group exited the cabin through a window that led to the backyard. They decided not to open the door to avoid leaving extra tracks. The wind and snow were already covering their previous path, but they still had to move carefully. The first hour of the journey proved to be a true test. Luna staggered alongside Alejandro, periodically glancing back at the basket. The pups whimpered pitifully, smelling her scent, but unable to get out. At one point, Elena thought they wouldn't even make it halfway. The she-wolf looked too weak, and ascending through the snow was agonizing, even for a human. The snow intensified, and by the time they reached a narrow path at the base of a steep slope, visibility had dropped to almost zero. They had to move, navigating by barely visible rock ledges. Twice, Elena nearly slipped into a snowdrift, and only Alejandro managed to catch her arm. The pups in the basket fell silent, apparently from the cold and fear, and Luna walked, stubbornly bending low to the ground. Suddenly, Alejandro heard dogs barking. The sound intensified and then faded, but it clearly came from the direction of their cabin. These could be hunting dogs, brought by Manuel and Don Esteban to track wolves by blood and scent. The man chilled at the mere thought that the dogs might catch them right on the trail. "We need to speed up," he said, turning to Elena. "It sounds like the dogs are already on our trail." The young woman nodded, wiping sweat from her brow. Luna nervously twitched her ears, as if she too heard the hostile barking. Spurred by fear, she quickened her pace, despite her wound. After some time, they reached a grotto that Alejandro called the antechamber of the mine. It was a small indentation in the rock, filled with rubble and covered in snow. Somewhere in its depths lay the entrance to an underground passage. Muffled drips and the dull roar of wind penetrating through cracks could be heard. "Here's the entrance," Alejandro said, pushing aside a pile of debris. "The mine is about 10 yards further. We just need to go through in the dark." But before they could step inside, a loud shout came from somewhere in the forest. "Stop!" Turning, they saw a group of 3 men, Manuel, Don Esteban, and another man with dogs. They were already aiming their rifles. The dogs growled furiously, almost breaking free from their leashes. "Put down the basket!" Don Esteban shouted. "So this is where you are. So you are hiding a she-wolf? I knew something was fishy." Manuel narrowed his eyes, noticing Luna, who was pressed against Alejandro's legs, breathing heavily. He gave a wry smile. "A pregnant she-wolf, or rather, already a mother. So, you have pups in that basket. Excellent. We'll rid our lands of a new pack and make some fine ears, too." Alejandro flared with rage. "Don't touch them. They haven't harmed anyone." "Keep your hands off that rifle," Don Esteban warned, seeing the man clenching his weapon. "You're all our captives, and so are your animals." The situation looked like a stalemate. 3 armed hunters against Alejandro and Elena, forced to defend a she-wolf with 4 pups. The dogs snarled, ready to tear into them. The wind blew snow, blinding their eyes, but it was still clear how tense the atmosphere was. "I'll shoot first," Manuel hissed, raising his rifle. "That she-wolf, and then the pups. That'll be the proper way. You, Alejandro, everyone in the village will curse you for helping predators." In an instant, the threat of a gunshot hung in the air. Elena clutched the basket to her chest, horrified at what would happen in the next second. But suddenly, as if from nowhere, a long, eerie wolf howl echoed. Almost immediately, the black wolf darted out from behind a rock formation. Its eyes glowed with fierce light, and its fur stood on end. It sprang between the people and the hunters, growling loudly. The dogs yelped, recoiling, and Manuel, confused, released the leashes. The black wolf made a threatening lunge, making it clear it was ready to tear apart anyone who tried to approach Luna and her children. Thick flakes of snow fell from the sky, intensifying the atmosphere to an extreme. Everyone froze, waiting to see what would happen next. The black beast, like a shadow, protected the she-wolf and her litter at the most critical moment, standing between the rifle barrels and Alejandro. It seemed nature itself had decided not to surrender its charges to slaughter. But were the hunters ready to retreat because of one wild wolf? Or would the shot still ring out, deciding the fate of several lives at once? The scene at the mine entrance was frozen, like an old film. The hunters held their rifles. Alejandro and Elena covered Luna and her pups, and the black wolf, fangs bared, stood defiantly, preventing the enemies from approaching. Minutes ticked by, and with each second the tension mounted. "Get out of here, you damn dog!" Manuel snarled and aimed, but Don Esteban tugged his sleeve, holding him back from a hasty shot. "Wait," he curtly ordered. "The wolf clearly senses something. If we shoot now, the others might be nearby. They'll tear us apart." The black beast seemed to understand every word. It took a couple more steps forward, growling so fiercely that the snow under its paws vibrated. Its fur bristled on its neck, and fury gleamed in its yellow eyes. Behind it, Luna, breathing heavily, flattened her ears, and the pups in the basket whimpered pitifully. Alejandro felt determination bubbling within him. "Leave us alone. You don't need to kill them. Wolves don't attack people without reason. We'll leave if you just let us pass." "Shut up, Hunter," Manuel barked angrily. "This isn't your land, and it's not for you to decide who lives and who dies. We're protecting our homes." Don Esteban nodded dryly. "Wolves have already caused so much grief here, or will you dispute that? And this black devil of yours seems to be afraid of nothing." The dogs barked again, but were clearly afraid to approach the black wolf. It was too large and looked fiercer than any of them. The seconds dragged on agonizingly. It seemed any small thing could trigger a bloody skirmish. While the hunters hesitated, Elena gathered her courage. She said quietly, but clearly, "How many wolves have you already killed, blaming them for everything? And have you considered that maybe it isn't only wolves taking livestock? There are two-legged ones who might have their own interests. And why shoot newborn pups?" Manuel squinted, as if considering her words, but then something stirred at his feet. One of the dogs, losing patience, lunged towards the black wolf. The beast reacted instantly, darting forward and sinking its fangs into the dog's nape, tossing the dog aside. Manuel fired wildly in a fit of rage, but missed due to the blizzard. The bullet hit the snowy wall. Frightened, Don Esteban also pulled the trigger, aiming at the wolf, and at that moment Alejandro cried out, trying to knock the aim off, but the shot still rang out. The black wolf seemed thrown backward, but it stayed on its paws, letting out a desperate roar. It seemed the bullet had only grazed its side. The wolf shook its head and stood again between the hunters and Luna. "Damn!" Don Esteban shouted, seeing that the beast had not fallen. The hunters hesitated, figuring out how not to be torn to shreds. Taking advantage of the enemy's momentary retreat, Alejandro abruptly dashed towards the mine, pulling Elena and the she-wolf with him. The black wolf, meanwhile, made another lunge, forcing the dogs to retreat. Manuel cursed, shouting commands, but the dogs didn't want to get under the fangs of the enraged beast. "Quickly!" Alejandro yelled, trying to shout over the howling wind. "Hide in the mine!" Elena held the basket with the pups, and Luna, limping, hobbled behind. The entrance to the underground passage was dark in the rock opening. They plunged inside, and after just a few steps, they were enveloped in pitch darkness, through which only glints of snow blowing in from outside penetrated. We need to go deeper, Elena breathed out. They might come in after us, but then, in the narrow tunnel, it will be harder for them to use their rifles. Right, Alejandro nodded, clutching his rifle to himself so as not to lose it. Hold on, Luna! The she-wolf, trembling with exhaustion and pain, walked beside them, sometimes touching the basket with her snout, as if checking if they were all there. Behind them, muffled shouts of hunters and the vicious barking of dogs could be heard, interspersed with the roar of the black wolf. It seemed the beast was deliberately delaying the enemies, giving the others a chance to escape. Finally, around another bend in the mine, they groped their way into a spacious cave where a faint light filtered through a crack in the ceiling. The air was damp and cool, but not as icy as outside. Alejandro placed the pups on a stone ledge, covering them with a blanket. Luna immediately lay down beside them, sheltering her young. It seems we're safe. But what now? Elena whispered, trying to catch her breath. Alejandro sank onto a stone, exhausted. I don't know. If the black wolf is still alive, he might escape or continue to distract them. The hunters might follow us, but these are labyrinths, and they don't know them as well. And we're at least somewhat familiar with this part of the cave. Suddenly, a powerful gust of wind roared from outside, making the very walls tremble. It seemed the blizzard had become even fiercer, and the hunters' chances of reaching the mine entrance had significantly decreased. Perhaps nature is on our side, Elena said softly, surprised by how strangely events had interwoven. Whatever happens, it's good that we at least managed to save the pups. Luna looked at them with tired but calm eyes, as if thanking them for their rescue. In this dilapidated mine, they found temporary shelter where humans and a wild beast could coexist. The moment seemed almost magical. A man and a she-wolf, exhausted but together, exchanged glances in the dim light. The pups sniffled, snuggled against their mother, unaware of the terrible threat outside. Somewhere far away beyond the snowy curtain, a conflict raged between the hunters and the black wolf. Was the beast still alive? Would the enemies manage to find the secret passage deeper into the cave? But in this lost corner of the Sierra Blanca, new life quietly pulsed. 4 tiny wolf pups, born in the harshest of conditions. Alejandro and Elena didn't know what awaited them, but they understood. They had become part of something greater, an ancient connection between humans and nature that no shots could stop.